My name is John Glanville and welcome to video 28 in the Calmness in Mind series. Now in this video we will begin to explore how we can rise above identification with our ego. The thought that the voice in our head is actually us and that it knows what is best for us. Because as you're becoming pretty aware, the thoughts of the ego are so often based in fear, doubt and control, which tend to pull you back from life when of course we are looking to step forward into the full richness of life in all its expressions. And I trust that you're starting to see that for most of our life we were being run unconsciously by our ego, okay? Our protective personality, our programming, our domestication, our mind, our little 8-year-old, or whatever label you feel comfortable using to name this collective conditioning of your identity by those external to you who tried to influence you into becoming what they thought was best for you. And remember, as I keep saying, to release yourself from anxiety or OCD, you need to become a new person rather than trying harder to be the same person. Now, as we get deeper into this course, we are going to start having more conversations that are very likely going to push a few emotional buttons, okay? Because we're going to be exploring perspectives that have always been clearly visible, yet very often hidden in plain sight. And a good example of this is the role of schooling. The role schooling has played into the programming of our brains and the development of our ego and the development of our sense of self or our identity. And I've been doing a lot of research recently about how what we might call the modern day education system, how it came into being, why it happened, and importantly, what were the objectives of the financial backers at that time of introduction. And it seems to have begun over 200 years ago, during the time of the Industrial Revolution, where industrialists needed people to operate all the machines, to populate the factories, to grow the food, to mine the resources, to transport the goods, and then to sell and to support all those products. Not only did they need a vast quantity of people, but they also required those people to be able to follow orders, to do as they were told. Rather than think for themselves, do as you're told, okay? Follow the rules, okay? To be respectful of authority, yeah? To be agreeable, yeah? To see that being dependent on an employer or the government as normal or to be expected. And therefore, via the introduction of factory schools, which later became government-run schools, there evolved a system designed to educate, or shall we say, indoctrinate, little worker drones who would pop out of the system with the appropriate limited mindset and restricted critical thinking. Because if you think about it, schools don't teach thinking outside of the box. Schools don't teach how money works. They don't talk about entrepreneurship, how to question authority. They don't teach confidence or how to stand up for yourself, how to question or to develop your own belief systems. They tend to program belief systems into you. Now, I'm not trying to be anti-government or sort of a conspiracy theorist here. This did happen, and it still does happen, and this is a fact. And if you don't believe me, here's a quote from Joel Mocha, who was a Northwestern University economist of that time. And this is what he wrote. Much of this education, however, was not technical in nature, but social and moral. Workers who had always spent their working days in a domestic setting had to be taught how to follow orders, how to respect the space and property rights of others, how to be punctual, docile and sober. And the early industrial capitalists spent a great deal of effort and time in the social conditioning of their labour force, especially in Sunday schools, which were designed to inculcate middle-class values and attitudes so as to make the workers more susceptible to the incentives that factory needed. Now, this education system has hardly changed to this day. It's even become more effective at producing good little citizens who do as they're told, regardless of how they feel or what they think on the inside. Okay? Compliant citizens who look to the government, science and authority to tell them what to do and how to do it. But many people are waking up to the realization that just maybe there are other ways to live, okay? And this cognitive dissonance between the person's beliefs and their behaviours can so very often be felt as anxiety. But if we flick back to before schooling was introduced, before the Industrial Revolution, before capitalism, workers were farmers or trade-specific artisans. They worked out of their homes, they set their own hours, they came up with clever solutions to whatever problem arose before them. You know, they did what they loved doing, and they had developed the appropriate personality to do that job properly, which they learned from their families or their peers rather than from the state. And this is actually really funny to me, because it seems to me that the population of the world is slowly waking up to the fact that they want to go back to that more natural way of being, whilst governments and corporations are trying harder and more forcibly to herd them down the same old worn-out paths of consumerism, which is causing much anxiety, much depression, and much exhaustion. Now, at least once a week somebody says to me, "John, this stuff you're teaching, it should be taught in schools." Okay, and I agree with them. I think if we did, people would be happier, they would be more confident, they would be following their dreams, they would be standing up for what they believe in, they would be creative and independent, and probably they would have a lot less anxiety and stress. But how would that help any government or corporation if they had a workforce that thought for themselves and put their own needs first? I hope you're kind of seeing where I'm pointing to here. 20 years ago, I thought people who homeschooled their children were hippies or radicals. But these days, okay, knowing what I now know, I really think if I could go back in time, I would very seriously consider homeschooling my children, or at least to have a serious plan to teach appropriate life skills and emotional self-mastery to balance out what the education was teaching or not teaching my children. Now remember, this course is about removing anxiety, OCD and depression. And to do this effectively, we must understand that anxiety comes from fear, and fear comes from internal belief conflicts and the brain-body conditioning that has been put upon us. So we need to ask ourselves, are our beliefs actually our beliefs? Or were we conditioned to have a set of beliefs that we think are our own, but are not, okay? And does by clinging to those old beliefs cause us internal conflict? And let me give you an example. Like believing working for the government will offer job security and is good, whilst being self-employed will be unstable and volatile, which is bad. When the truth may be totally different. You know? Most self-employed people that I know, they love the freedom of working for themselves and could never go back to being employed and being told what to do every day. Are our beliefs serving us well? Especially if calmness and happiness are the new goals that we're looking for, rather than following rules, being nice, looking for security and things like that, which were likely programmed into us from school or from our parents who also got programmed at school. So this is just one example of how our mind, our ego, our little 8-year-old may have become conditioned. So let's drill down a bit deeper, and as ever, let's try and keep an open mind. Let's try and put facts and science to one side, not to dismiss them, but to ask ourselves, from what perspective or in which context is that fact relevant? Or who paid for that scientific research? Yeah? Or what scientific research may be hidden from us? Let me give you an example. What if science had already found really cool things, but they were hiding them from us? Because if they were known, whole industries might become redundant, like if a person had invented a way for energy to be harnessed for free. You know, there would be thousands of corporations and governments that would go out of business if fuel became free. So what would the funders of that science do with that information? What if our deep dependency on science was in some small part programmed into us during our factory schooling, where we were trained to just blindly trust the science? When the really important stuff like happiness, love, creativity, connection, family, friendship, fun, joy, playfulness, identity, personality, intimacy, these are totally unscientific and unprovable, but they are things that anxious and depressed people really want. But they're looking towards science to give it to them, but science is hardly researching these things, as nobody is prepared to fund it, okay? And nobody makes money from you just being happy for no reason at all. Just take this course, for example, okay? I think this is a pretty sensible course. I think it's quite logical, reasonably effective, certainly more effective than what mainstream medicine is providing. Yet I'm being deplatformed from social media because my work is not in line with that of the scientists. Now, don't get me wrong, I love science. However, I split it into two realms. That which is linear, so can be proved, like a this causes a that, you know, therefore it's repeatable and true. And then there is that which is unprovable, but may still be true, and therefore no less scientific, but science hasn't evolved yet to the place where it can measure that non-linear experience. We can't prove that there's a God, yet many scientists believe in God. We can't prove that love exists, yet people will give up their lives for love. You know? Scientifically measuring atoms is a provable objective experience, yet measuring love is a subject and unprovable experience, but no less real, okay? And certainly very desired, and desire is an emotion, and therefore unscientific because it's not repeatable. You know, emotions are very fluid, they're always changing. Some days you feel good, some days you feel bad. So what I'm going to suggest is that we don't get caught up in all those perspectives and stories. Let's keep an open mind and use sensible models to create new belief systems within us that may lead us into more emotional calmness. Okay, let's get back on track. The title of this video is Rising Above Identification with Our Ego. It's not about getting rid of the ego, it's about better understanding it. It's about befriending it rather than fighting it and battling with it. And to do this, I would like to